This is our fourth and final week of reading lengthy passages from the Gospel of John, introducing us to important encounters people had with Jesus. First, there was Nicodemus, the Pharisee, who came under the cover of darkness to seek to understand Jesus' message. Then we read of the Samaritan woman, avoiding her community by coming to the well at high noon, who is surprised to encounter Jesus and find him willing to engage with her in a theological debate. Her testimony that he is the Messiah causes her community to seek out Jesus for themselves. Last week, we read of Jesus' encounter with a man born blind. While others can only see a pitiful beggar whose disability is proof of someone else's sin, Jesus sees an opportunity to demonstrate God's healing and compassion. The result is a collision with the powers that be, who are both angry that Jesus has healed on the Sabbath and worried that Jesus' fame will spell trouble for them. Today we are given a story that is both similar and very different from last week. It is another miraculous healing story, but heightened in every way possible. Instead of an unknown beggar, it is Lazarus, a man with connections in Jerusalem. And in the place of a stranger to Jesus, it is a member of a family beloved by him. Lazarus is the brother of Mary and Martha. And instead of healing from illness or disability or disease, this story is the closest we have to a resurrection story before Easter Sunday. Some commentators are quick to call it a resuscitation and not a resurrection, but the story is vivid and graphic as it tells of a body long dead and in a state of decomposition that is brought back to life. But although the climax of the story is a bandaged body exiting a tomb, central also to the story are Mary and Martha and their grief. They experience worry and concern when their brother falls ill, and they reach out to Jesus, hoping that his ties to their family will bring him quickly to their brother's aid. Instead, they experience Jesus' absence, as he determinedly stays away from them until several days after he hears of Lazarus' death. From Jesus' point of view, we hear his rationale. As with the blind man, Jesus sees Lazarus' illness as an opportunity to demonstrate the power of God. But from Mary and Martha's point of view, all they know is that they get no response to their plea. Jesus doesn't come to save the day, and they must watch helplessly as their brother dies. They are two unmarried women whose brother protector is now gone. And so they grieve his death. They prepare his body, and they witness that body be put in a tomb and sealed up. They are surrounded by family and friends from Bethany and nearby Jerusalem who gather to support them in their time of loss, but they are uncertain of their future. Meanwhile, Jesus is telling his disciples that he wants to return to Judea, a place where only recently some people tried to stone him. Jesus is determined to go, and so the disciples accompany him, at least some of them convinced that they are actually going to their death. As Jesus approaches their hometown of Bethany, Martha hears of his coming and runs out to meet him. Her response is flavored by both reproach and hope. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Jesus speaks of resurrection, and Martha agrees that she believes in the final resurrection on the last day. Jesus responds to that with his most famous I am statement. I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Now, there are two things to note here. One is a reminder that the Bible often gives us the English word believe for what is more accurately translated as trust. Jesus is not saying there's an intellectual test to be passed in order to enter into eternal life. He is asking Martha, "Do you trust me?" Her response, "Yes, Lord," leads to a profession of faith very similar to the woman at the well. "You are the Messiah," she says, "the Son of God, the one coming into the world." At this point, I don't know if Martha knows the implications of all of this for her brother, but she does know that she trusts Jesus, and she knows that she needs her sister to hear all of this too. So Martha returns to the house and tells Mary privately to go and see Jesus. Mary leaves, but not privately. The whole crowd of mourners follow her, thinking that she is leading them to the tomb, the place of death, when in reality, she's leading them to Jesus, the source of life. Unlike Martha, Mary expresses her grief without hope. She weeps while saying, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Mary cries. The crowd cries. And Jesus, disturbed and moved, weeps also. Some of the mourners are moved by his tears, and others wonder just how much Jesus could have loved Lazarus when he neglected to heal his friend after so quickly healing strangers. Everyone arrives at the tomb. Jesus calls for the stone to be rolled away, and Martha, ever practical, warns him that there will be a smell, for the body has been there 4 days. This is significant because there was a tradition at the time that the life force of a body stayed close to it for 3 days. So the repeated statement that Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days stresses that he is beyond all hope of life. Jesus gently rebukes Martha, who earlier had claimed her trust in him. He says to her, "Didn't I tell you that if you trusted in me, you would see the glory of God?" Jesus makes a public show of telling God he doesn't need any proof that he and God are united, but he asks that God reveal this truth to the crowd. And he calls Lazarus out of the tomb. In bandages, the figure emerges. "Unbind him and let him go," says Jesus, and they do. But it's not the end of the story. And I've actually included more verses than the lectionary allowed, just so that you get the whole picture. Some people are amazed and put their trust in Jesus after this miracle, but others return to the places of power and raise the alarm. And again, like in so many other stories, while some rejoice in the power of God shown in Jesus, others plot to stop him. As one commentator I read this week said, "The immediate way to the cross and Jesus' own tomb starts here, where Jesus is most impossibly, lovingly life-giving. And they will plan to kill Lazarus too, once the word about him gets out." But why does Jesus only raise Lazarus? And why doesn't he explain his absence to his dearest of friends? And why do we not hear of Lazarus again after this? The story, like all miracle stories, is shrouded in mystery and poses continuing issues for those of us who have grieved like Mary and Martha and have not been rewarded with a miracle for our loved ones. So what is the good news for us as we are confined in our homes and hear horrifying stories of medical shortages and suffering in other countries further along in their battle with the COVID-19 virus? What good is Jesus if he won't conjure a miracle when we really need him? One message for me is that Jesus has the long view. Even when he is physically distant from his Bethany friends, his heart is with them, and he trusts God with their ultimate destination. The real proof of his love for them isn't in the miracle. It's in the showing up. It's in his tears. It's in his determination to show God's light and power in the midst of grief and death. As Jesus says to Martha, "Those who trust in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and trusts in me will never die. Being in relationship with Jesus doesn't mean avoiding the realities of suffering and death. It means being assured that suffering and death are not the end and are not the desire of our Creator. We were made for eternal life and life abundant. And until we can experience both of those for ourselves, Jesus will continue to stand with us, shed tears with us, and remind us to trust him. And as we approach Holy Week, having Jesus with us in our grief and death also means that we must follow him through his. We walk with him to Jerusalem and bear witness to his abandonment, his pain and isolation, his suffering and death, trusting his words that even this will not prevent God's new life from bursting forth. We will know resurrection for ourselves. In life, in death, in life beyond death, God is with us. Thanks be to God.